Hello everyone. It's been a while since I've done a video on Fire Emblem, the latest one being a review on Fire Emblem Engage several months ago. Today I'm doing another one, a review on the first ever Fire Emblem release in America, FE7 or the Blazing Blade. Keep in mind that this is my first time playing, so I didn't play it back when it came out. But I will also not be doing any comparing to the newer games because that's kind of unfair, especially when it comes to the quality of life features. I'll of course be covering the main strategy gameplay of Fire Emblem while also touching on the story and support system, as well as some side stuff. Although this is a mostly spoiler-free video, I will be covering the whole game, so there might be some spoilery stuff on screen, so be warned. I would also like to clarify and say that I'm a relative newcomer to the Fire Emblem franchise, so if there's a feature in an older game that I bring up in this game, that's why. If you liked the video here today, like and subscribe for more Fire Emblem content in the future, and without further ado, let's get into it. Undoubtedly, the most important part about Fire Emblem is the strategy gameplay and the map design. And to be honest, going into Blazing Blade, I didn't have the highest expectations. But I gotta say, I was very pleasantly surprised. I really enjoyed it. My favorite aspect of it being the challenge. The Switch Fire Emblems might have had the occasional difficult chapter, but I feel like the Blazing Blade was a lot more difficult for the whole thing. And I think there are a few reasons for that. For one, like all the older Fire Emblem games, the feature of permadeath where if your unit dies in battle, they are gone from the game forever. There is no gameplay mode where you can play with this feature turned off, so you're required to play this way, making it so that the only characters you're required to finish the game with are Lyn, Eliwood, and Hector. Most players coming from the newer titles might not like this, but I personally don't mind it. In this game, I especially like the permadeath because the characters don't matter as much, so you have to appreciate for the time you have them. And especially in this game, it made me appreciate units from their battle prowess and their skills, rather than their personality or impact on the story. The permadeath also helps another reason why this game is difficult, how new units flow into your party. Most of the time, you'll be recruiting new units through the battlefield, which require a specific unit, most of the time Eliwood, to go up and speak to them. I bet unless you're really experienced with the game, you're bound to lose a few units before the game is over. Depending on how well you play or how lucky you are, you could either end up with a full roster of people, including some people to sit in the bench, or just barely have enough to make it to the final chapter. To amend this, the game does give you plenty of units to recruit. That way you should have enough people to start a chapter, and still reach the limit of people you can use. But these potential new allies won't directly come for your aid, so you have to be smart and send the right people over to come recruit them. I'm not trying to argue that every ally you recruit is some ridiculously hard task, but most of the time you still have to go out of your way to recruit them. This next reason is probably the most obvious one, but the chapters are just more difficult in general. The game has 30 chapters, which means about 30 some maps. And some of these maps can be really long and challenging. For example, the one you're seeing on screen right now took me about an hour and 40 minutes to complete from start to finish. Now that time can be reduced with some optimizations on my end, but that 1 hour and 40 minute time doesn't even include resets when I messed up. This chapter required me to kill over 40 enemies, while opening every door in my path so I can kill the hidden ones. The game also doesn't have a rewind mechanic, so you can't take back moves you've already made. If you're playing on the Switch, there is a rewind feature built into the app you're using it on, but depending on who you ask, it can be viewed as cheating because in their eyes, the rewind mechanic wasn't originally built into it, so having it there seems like a failsafe. So if you're playing the Switch version and want to play the game how it was originally intended, not rewinding seems to be the safest option. However, that means if you make a misclick, you're stuck with it and there's nothing you can do. So in this game, you really gotta be careful about where you set your allies, because if enough enemies are in the area, they can totally gang up and kill just about everybody. Because there are several chapters similar to the one I just mentioned, and this one isn't even the hardest in the game. Not by a landslide. I'm not trying to paint the hard chapters as a bad thing, I actually really enjoyed them quite a bit. But if you're trying to get into the Fire Emblem series and you don't want to use the rewind feature on Nintendo Switch Online, this might be a harder game to get through. But on the flip side, I don't want you to assume that I had a ridiculously hard time with the game, or that the game was ridiculously hard in general. It is mostly fair, it just has a lot more of challenging moments. I feel like this game also makes you work a lot harder when it comes to your inventory. Until chapter 13, you were limited by just what's in your inventory and what other units have. In that chapter, you finally get Merlinus, which will let you have items sent to a convoy if you buy them in shops or run out of room in your inventory. The only time you can really take advantage of Merlinus is if he's currently alive on the chapter, or before the chapter even begins. If he dies in the chapter when you deploy him, he does come back, and that makes him probably the strongest unit in the game just for that, but him dying also takes away the convoy option, so if you want to buy stuff, you have to make do with what you have for inventory space. There's also no ability to buy stuff before the chapter begins, so if you want to buy stuff, you have to go to shops on the map itself. I really enjoyed this though. It added more value to the convoy by not making it permanent. So you would either want to protect Berlinus by sending a unit next to him, or get your shop visits as soon as possible. All these mechanics I just listed out are the game being difficult in a fair way. Sadly, it's not always like this. The main time I'd call this game unfair is in its final 2 chapters. The penultimate one isn't as bad. It's a fairly standard chapter until you reach the boss fight. It's a really powerful one, and it's basically impossible to do any real damage. The total health is 68, and not even my most powerful units could do any damage. The only reason I even managed to beat it was because I bought a bunch of killer and brave weapons so that I could either have a crit or do multiple hits in one attack. The issue is that if you do not have a brave or killer weapon, you're not going to be able to do any damage with anybody. I think 6 damage was the most I could do with one character, and if you don't have a silent staff on you, that stops the enemy magic, which also has a very small hit chance, meaning unless you have a silent staff, every attack you do is going to put your unit close to death every single time, which puts more importance on what weapon you have to attack an enemy, rather than having the right unit to attack an enemy. So if you didn't pick up a killer weapon or a brave weapon before the chapter began, good luck killing that thing. Even with those particular types of weapons, you still might not be doing enough damage. The brave weapons do attack multiple times, but it doesn't do any more damage than a regular weapon, and the killer weapons require you to get a crit chance, which is all luck. Maybe if the boss's defense wasn't so high, I wouldn't have an issue with this, but the boss has a ridiculously high defense to everything. The final chapter is just a more extreme version of the one that came before, boasting 20 more health and even more damage and defense. And for my team, only 3 of my units were actually able to do a decent amount of damage to them. But that's not even the final boss. The final boss could basically wipe out any party member who attacked him, and none of them could do any damage except for the guy I got in that chapter. And even when he attacked and did 1/7 of the final boss's health bar, he'd be left at 2 health every single time. You can get weapons in that chapter that let your units do actual damage to it, but you need to have your unit have an S rank for that particular weapon, and since there's not really any real way to grind in this game, you can't really do that unless you happen to get that unit to that level. Again, this might not have been a big issue for some of you, but for me, who didn't have ridiculously overpowered units, it was a struggle to get through. So have fun having a one-man army, I guess. I think that if there was a way to train your units through auxiliary battles, I think the problem would have mostly been fixed. But since they'd have to either make new maps or reuse old ones, I can see why they didn't. But outside of those final 2 chapters, I was very impressed with the gameplay. It managed to have a fun challenge while not feeling impossible most of the time, and that challenge allowed me to plan things even more strategically than I would have otherwise if it was easier. Going into this game, I did not expect there to be a support system at all. In Fire Emblem, the support system allows units that are close to each other to gain additional boosts in battle. The amount of buffs that particular unit has is dependent on the support level that goes from C to A rank. Also telling a mini story featuring the 2 characters. I really like this mechanic. It allows me to learn more about the characters so that if they die in battle, I would care a lot more. I was around 18 to 19 chapters into this game when I finally had a menu when I tried to move a character that allowed me to have a support. Now imagine my surprise when I learned that this feature was in the game since chapter 10. I was initially happy and excited as a feature I really liked in the series actually made an appearance in the game when I didn't know about it. But then I thought about it for a second. Why didn't this game take the time to even explain what the feature even was? Or even that there was such a feature in this game to begin with? I get that the support system in this game isn't as important as the main gameplay, but it still should have at least explained it. And since by my knowledge the game doesn't go out of its way to tell you about it, chances are you probably won't know it even exists until a lot later into the game. Ignoring the fact that the game doesn't really tell you about it, it's also needlessly restrictive. The only way you can build support level in this game is having the units end their turn while sitting next to each other. You can't gain any support level after attacks when units are adjacent to each other, because if they move away, you don't get any support level. So if you want to build it, you basically have to make sure that the units end their turn next to each other every single time, because you need quite a bit of turns to go by before the support level goes up. And the amount of turns range a lot. I could spend 40 turns sending Sane and Isadora next to each other and not rank up once. Yes, I tried this. and I can spend a fourth of that time trying to get Eliwood and Lyn to level up. Weirdly, each character is also limited to 5 supports per character. Each rank up is considered one of the 5, so any combination will work. It's really weird that there's so many supports in the game, yet you're always limited to that number. There are a total of 115 different pairs of supports that people can have, yet you are also limited to one full one per character. I like the support system, so I wanted to see how they were in this game, so I grinded out as many as I could, and I ended up getting 2% of the game's total. I guess with the weird rank up process, the limit of 5 doesn't really matter since the only character I actually managed to get to 5 is Eliwood. So, although I'm happy the support system made its way into this game, I'm definitely not a fan with how it was handled. Luckily, this section isn't all negative as I really like the amount of side content this game has. There is an arena mode where you can battle players online by making a team of 5 with the best units in your playthrough and battling them out. There is a sound room where you can listen to any one of the game's soundtracks that you've unlocked, all 98 songs. There is also a support viewer that lets you read any of the supports in the game, and if you want to play the game 50,000 times, you just might be able to get all of them. When you view the supports in this menu, it comes with a background this time, rather than the battlefield how it was when you unlock it in your main playthrough. You can also go to the Battle History tab to see how good or how bad you did in your main playthrough. The different tabs for each section makes me wonder how they graded it as you played, because I'm sorry, there's no way I deserve a rating of C for my main playthrough. Unless I played it really badly and I don't want to admit it to myself. And those are really cool extras to go back to. I get that it's not unique to this game and other games have it as well, but I really like it when I have stuff like this in games. It's something to do outside the main game, and it gives me the way to look back on it as time passes. The Blazing Blade definitely puts a large emphasis on its battles, so it makes sense for the story to take a back seat. While there's definitely a story to the Blazing Blade, its importance is reduced a lot to serve as a tool to go from battle to battle, and I think it works well. I know I'd said I'd be light on comparison when it comes to the newer games, but I feel like this one's really important. The newest game in the franchise, Engage, also tries to have a simple story, but in comparison it fails. Where for most of the game, the Blazing Blade's dialogue exchanges are pretty short, because there are only a few times in the game where the story moments are long, and those are usually in key moments of the story. Engage, on the other hand, has a lot more moments that are overly long and aren't interesting in any way to warrant having them. For the purpose that it served, the Blazing Blade story did really well. That being said, I'm not really sure how far I can go into when talking about the story. I could go in depth and criticize parts of the story that I don't like, but that feels kinda unfair for what the story is trying to do. Especially because the story contents from this game don't take up much time, and aren't a huge part of the experience. Before I conclude though, I do want to touch on the characters a little bit. There are a total of 44 characters in this game. Of course, with that large number, it makes sense that most go by the wayside. Most of them don't really get that much development. You got your usual archetypes. The teenage girl who is timid around men, the scholar mage, the other teenage girl who has magical powers, who is also pretty meek. You got your silent, brooding fighter type, and Sane, who is the best character. The list goes on and on. I wouldn't go out and say that any of these characters are great, but I will say despite the lack of story present, the game did a good job of making me care whether these units lived or died. It's not like every character was loosely developed, as I feel like the main 3, Eliwood, Lyn, and Hector, got their fair share of attention, and I liked all 3 of the characters. And that is the end of my thoughts on the Blazing Blade. Overall, I really liked the game. It definitely had its fair share of problems, but I feel like the gameplay was strong enough for that not to matter too much. I probably wouldn't call it one of my favorite games or anything like that, but it was still a very enjoyable experience. I would definitely recommend it if you haven't played it. And I'm just gonna come out and say it, I liked it more than Engage. I would say it's my favorite Game Boy Advance game, and it is, but that's not really saying much since I've played a grand total of 3. But I will say, I am really excited to go to the Hector route one day. But with that, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this review of Fire Emblem The Blazing Blade, and I'll see you all next time.